Start off with a little lightning round. So our lightning round is just going to begin with all of our panelists introducing themselves with their emojis. So you guys can go ahead. You guys will have 1 minute to introduce yourselves each. And so this round will go until 3:10 EST. All right, so why don't let's kick it off with my homie and triple OG, James Miles out of Seattle.
What's up? What's up? You want me to put my emoji back in here, or just?
Oh, it's in the chat.
It's in the chat.
Yeah.
Sweet. So I'll introduce myself, James Miles. I use he, him pronouns, Executive Director of ArtsCorps. Jamel and I go way back like a rocking chair, and excited for this conversation.
Awesome. Oh, hey, Danielle, what's good? All right. Cool. So let's go for the next. And James, what do you do?
Oh, I'm a hip hop educator. Yeah, AKA the Fresh Professor. I run a nonprofit in Seattle, Washington called ArtsCorps. We do free arts programming K through 12, integrating art into the school day, after school arts programming, and professional development around the world, training teachers in culturally responsive pedagogy, social and emotional learning, and academic mindsets.
Awesome. All right. And next up, we got Thea Charles, who's the head of knowledge and impact at Siegel Endowments. Why don't you give us a rundown of your emojis and what you do?
Yeah, I put 3 yoga poses here. I think it goes without saying that having this grounding during this time is extremely important. So that is where I am at this point. But my name's Thea. I work at Siegel Family Endowment. I'm the head of knowledge and impact. That means that I'm able to help the organization figure out what information to take in and help direct how it informs our grant making. I want to give a little bit of a caveat to say that my background's a little bit different than my other co-panelists who are like out in the forefront of the work that's happening. I work at a foundation right now, even though I used to be an educator both at the DOE and a nonprofit. So I'll be giving a perspective from like a philanthropy kind of hat, and then also like just helping think about the questions we're thinking about and how to, shape our work. So thanks for inviting me here.
Awesome. No, we're glad to have you. All right. Next up, we got my man, Danny Rojas from All-Star Code. Let's give it up for Danny.
Thanks so much. Such a pleasure to be on this panel. So just a quick shout out to the emoji. So the first is a Peruvian flag, Peru. The second is a medal. And I compete in triathlons and marathons, half marathons. So I'm missing that competitive community. And the third one is a ballot box. Reminder to do your census. Make sure you vote. It's coming up. It's important that we represent our communities at the ballot box. I'm the executive director of All-Star Code, and All-Star Code is a nonprofit computer science organization centering its work on Black and Latino youth, particularly young men of color. And we are about to launch in about 40 days our first virtual summer intensive. So just really excited to be here as part of this conversation around culturally responsive pedagogy and also social media, and how it all sort of comes together.
Dope. Yeah, I mean, this is a moment where so many things are coming together. And got to give it up for our next panelist, Christy Crawford from the DOE CS for All. Let's give it up for Christy Crawford. Introduce your emojis and what are you doing? Oh, wait. Can you guys hear Christy?
Sorry about that.
Okay, there you go.
But my emojis is just peace, peace, peace. I have 2 little boys who are driving me crazy. So I'm part of those families who need a little zen. But so I'm the director of culturally responsive ed at Computer Science for All. And our team is just helping teachers bring computer science all over the city, the kids who need it.
Awesome. Yeah, no, shout outs to CS for All. This is a huge CS for All. This is a huge organization that, hugely influential organization that's really shifting the conversation and guiding the conversation around computational thinking and that kind of mastery for our young people going forward. Yeah, big up CS for All. All right. So we're going to do this a little bit like a little talk show for folks here. All right. We're going to go through 3 rounds of questions. All right. And our first question is around challenges. And so just for a little grounding, before the COVID-19 outbreak, there was a much needed shift towards using culturally responsive approaches to broadening the participation of historically underrepresented peoples and communities in the fields of computer science and computational thinking. Now, in the midst of a pandemic that disproportionately affects Black and Brown communities and the nation's education systems making the leap to remote learning overnight, social media and culturally responsive pedagogy plays an even more critical role in engaging young people in the educational process. In this world before COVID-19, you had a huge trend of, like the GIF below, of teachers and educators removing the tools right from students, removing cell phones right from students. Many schools prohibited social medias, with teachers routinely banning student access to mobile phones and apps. And now, almost overnight, we see the situation reversed, where the only means for some of our students to actually engage with education is through social media. And it's the very thing that's used to connect teachers to students. First question is, how have you seen your work in the education landscape adapt to this change? What do you see from your perspective as some of the most difficult aspects of this change? We'll bat this around for about 10 minutes, and whoever wants to speak can just jump on in.
I don't mind. I can jump in and start talking about some of our grantees' work. So as I mentioned, we work at a foundation, and so like we get to see firsthand the work of a lot of different organizations, and I've always like been really excited and blown away by what they're doing. And so one of the programs I wanted to highlight was the Teacher in Residence program at Cornell Tech, which is led by Diane, who's in this session right now, kind of famous on the chat, I see. Essentially, they were able to get up and running a Twitter campaign in an impressive amount of time so that their students were able to continue to have access to computational thinking activities that they can do at home, that they could do with their families. And in our conversation, one thing that was really fascinating was this idea that having the work like happen at home helped to kind of ground them even more in their culturally responsive pedagogy, because students were able to like pull from their direct environment when they were doing this work. So sometimes you're in the classroom and things become a little bit more general, like write an algorithm for how to, put together a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But when they're home and they're doing work like, how do you do this? How are you starting your day? What is your life like? It really helps like validate the experience that they're having. And I think that it went a long way for raising the types of like engagement and participation that they were able to keep. So that was really just exciting to see.
Hey guys, this is Danny. Happy to jump in and just to share a little bit about that dichotomy of sort of banning cell phones to now we're completely remote learning, and it's all about access. So I think like for us, as we're organizing our work at ArtsCorps Code, it starts with how do we address the equity issues that are in the immediate? So devices, access to broadband. We're a 6-week summer intensive program that is live remote learning every day. So making sure that we're able to understand what are those necessary utilities that they're going to need. And at the second, so the second piece is understanding home learning environments and really sort of being empathetic, I think, in this age of COVID, how that is so important in order for us to even think about sort of engaging with remote learning. Once we're able to establish that, and we're working through that, because every organization is, really thinking about social media and just ways to engage in computer science education in a fundamentally different way, staying to our core, but also engaging with live polling, engaging with Kahoots on live quizzes that are online, and also thinking about sort of this notion of blended learning or hybridized learning, where you can go remote live, but also access so many resources that are incredibly great, and it's sort of our responsibility to help curate so that they can do it on their own and sort of drive that lifelong learning even further. So it's this sort of understanding the equity building blocks that we need to overcome, and then continuing to engage in a way that our students are already used to engaging, which is, you know, online, which is social. It has to have sort of a fun element to it and a real culturally competent element to it as well.
So building upon what Danny said, our team is in overdrive, just like teachers across the city. And I think what's been happening across the country is folks are in overproduction mode. There are teachers who are working more now than they have ever done before. And I'm talking about teachers who are spending a 16-hour day. But I'm finding the biggest challenge is just to get folks to slow down. And it's not about more content, it's just about being thoughtful about the content that's out there. So overproduction and COVID, it's gonna happen, but we're asking folks just to stop and survey the situation, to talk to families first, sort of make families that equal partners so that we can understand what's happening in the house. Because parents are those great influencers. And I think parents are the only way that we're going to find out who's really turning us off, are they tuning out? Without that parental input, we could be dead in the water.
Yeah, I would add to that as well. It's been interesting seeing so many teachers jump onto TikTok recently. People, adults, my colleagues who are like, nah, I don't do TikTok, I don't do social media. All of a sudden, like, yo, how do you figure this out? So, you know, our boy Mike Cleve is reading Shakespeare on TikTok, and that's a daily class with his students. That's exciting. Seeing that young man teach mathematics on TikTok, you know, completely culturally responsive pedagogy. I'm finding that more and more teachers are like, so what's that again? What are youth doing? So if I play this song, can we use that in class? And just like, oh, okay. And you know, the response has been like, yo, I do a lyrical placement with this one song. It was really popping. They loved it. Thank you, James. So you're seeing more and more teachers like flip their mentality and their approach to teaching, and to me that's huge. I would say the biggest challenge that I'm seeing here is in the suburbs and the poorer areas of our area, is that not as many young people have access to technology. So we've had to move and counteract that and provide analog lessons, which is really difficult when you're remote learning, right? So we've been like dropping off physical supplies at sites where food is dropped off for students, and saying like, great, we know you don't have access to a computer at home, but here's some art supplies, here's some educational supplies, and here's a little cue like, hey, this company's offering free internet for 2 months. Check it out. That's how we've navigated that, but that's been incredibly difficult because creating those physical supplies is like tripling our budget in terms of what we need to reach the students, but it's what's needed to try to level the quote unquote playing field.
And then also, like, as we're talking about challenges, us as an organization, our challenges mostly take the form of these open questions that we're trying to figure out. And so 2 of them that we've been thinking about most recently related to this is, one, you know, we know that social media is like very easily accessible, but we want to make sure that we're thinking critically about whether or not it's like the highest quality solution that teachers can always use. And so how can you provide support either in the way of like peer organizations or experts that can help them think critically about like the types of social media they're using and like whether or not it's the best way to reach their students. And of course, we have a lot of challenges that come up related to privacy. There's like so much that we have to learn and make sure that students and teachers and parents like feel protected when they're on the platforms and make sure that they're having like a positive educational experience.
Just want to add one more sort of challenge as we think about remote learning. We're all sort of getting used to how we manage the real estate on our screens, both as an educator and also as a student. So that piece is also sort of another barrier when we think about if all of the building blocks are in place How are they engaging? How are they actually able to smoothly transition? This is also for educators out there. Educators can manage a class. Educators can drive social emotional learning. But becoming a remote instructor or educator is a very different skill set and competency, and it's something that we're really thinking a lot about with our instructional staff and how we build those skills on Zoom. How do we transition from a Zoom to a Kahoot? How do we think about also if we're taking over a screen, that we're taking over power of the student's screen. So how does that dynamic sort of feel? So I think that's the other piece, is getting used to the sharing of who controls the screen and how we position learning in that context.
I mean, I think, and just to add some of the stuff that's coming in on the chat, in addition to this thing of screen economy, access to technology being a huge overwhelming threat around the country, and then teachers and educators being able to actually build the capacity to be able to do this kind of work is something that we've seen, constantly reverberate in our work as like key themes, that have really, as key themes of real challenge points, from Francis. The internet is vast and there's so many resources, but finding the right tools is key, and, I think this is so true what Christy you're saying about teachers working harder now in this past 3-month period than ever before. This has been an extremely intense period, and I really want to validate what James is bringing forward around like the social emotional needs of students and needing to be able to actually accommodate for that. Like, we're not on vacation. This is actually a pandemic crisis that we're in the middle of, and so not losing sight of that is really important. I just want to pause really quickly before we go into the next session, because I think we're still getting a little bit of feedback. If I can just ask the panelists to just refresh. And so you just refresh your screen and you'll just jump back in on audio video and we'll try it one more time. For everybody who's in on the chat, please stay engaged on the chat. Great. Can you guys hear me nice and clear? Great. Awesome. Yeah.
Oh yeah, now that sounds great.
Yeah.
Hey.
Sometimes hopping is a little finicky.
Okay. Yes, that's good.
Great. And let's see. I think we're still waiting for Christy. I think we're still with Christy. I think we're still waiting on Christy. Yeah. And there she comes. Great. Yeah, it's going to happen. All right, let's go on to the next one. And one thing that may also help to improve with it, if it hasn't improved, is just if you aren't speaking, place yourself on mute, and we'll try it that way as well. We're working through it. All right, excellent. Yeah, that may have been the solve. So we went through challenges. All right, let's take a look at some best practices. And we can.
I can go ahead and jump in again, ready for some best practices. The ones that we've seen have been mainly around like engagement and participation. So that's a huge challenge that folks are facing as they're going into remote learning. And so anecdotally, we've been heard that like lots of people are having success with being creative, coming up with anything from kids wearing certain colors to bringing a like favorite stuffed animal with them. When they have younger kids, having older kids help to facilitate the sessions that are going on. All these different ideas are like bubbling up, and want to make sure just like not to espouse the idea that just showing up is enough, but we also do want to like applaud the work that organizations are doing to even have that first step happen. Because if that first step doesn't happen, then they're not going to even be able to get to the point where they can like really help to advance like student learning and outcomes. And so those are a lot of the ideas that we heard and like wanted to share, and would love to even hear more ideas about.
What has been really helpful for us is just to start a family council. So rather than waiting till the end of a product, to the end of an event and asking families what you think, we started from the beginning, and we'll continue to do that so that they're co-creators. So that means it's parent and it's the kid. And it's really just like a marketer would do, is asking them, what mediums are you on? How long do you want this to last? What sort of interactive features do you need? And it's been heavenly. So our first attempt at that was an event with Code Society that happened last week. It was crazy fun. By all accounts, it felt like Electric Company on steroids. So if you remember 106 in Park or Teen Summit on BET, that's what it felt like. So it was a little crazy to take concepts from the blueprint, right? The blueprint is what we do. It's talking about algorithms and abstraction and data and networks. But all of a sudden, Code Society was helping us make this learning lexicon actually happen in the family's living room. And that's what we want. We want it to be second nature. So that asking families, listening to them just like a marketer would, enables us to think about, okay, do we have to compete with Travis Scott on Fortnite? Or is there something that we can pull out about computer science that makes you want to be there and just makes it feel like, you know, a normal part of your life that you want to continue to hear about without me shoving it down your throat or fighting you about it?
I would add, you know, both as a big Code Society fan and a cast member from the electric company, that's so key and so important. We had to redirect our education resources to be family resources because we knew that the parents, the guardians, the grandparents, the uncles, the aunts, they were the ones teaching. So you can't, like, a child cannot learn independently without some support. You know, the study showed that, you know, if the student loves their teacher, they will do that much better. We hope our children love their families. So we want to try to foment that kind of love and dedicate those resources to both families and their youth. Meeting young people where they are, I think that's been key. You know, we created some videos for students to watch. We saw that there was little interaction, so we started meeting them on Instagram, and that was a lot more engaging. There was dialogue that could happen on Instagram, both, you know, especially on live where you see people's comments like we're doing now. There's nothing compared to having that conversation live online with a young person.
You know, but the other piece of that is what I'm watching is when remote learning assignments are given, the teacher is trusting that, the kid is doing it. But what's often happening is child is on Google Classroom messaging with their little friends, and it has nothing to do with the work. If we can find pieces where, you know what, it looks like what they normally do, that we may have something about computational thinking on one side, on the other side, we're asking them to have a chat with a classmate about what's going on, right? And at the same time, they're pushing up emojis. It fits into the mediums that they're used to, rather than pushing something on them that they just don't want to be bothered with.
I've just got +1 on so many great examples. What we're thinking at ArtsCorps Code, particularly around community and parent engagement, has been really the focus of ArtsCorps Code is providing exposure to the opportunity for economic mobility in tech. So we're hoping to inspire our students to pursue computer science in post-secondary education and ultimately leading to employment. But parents also need that education to understand what this opportunity really is about. So we've partnered with an organization called Up to Code Academy, provides incredible content that just teaches about the digital divide and also lifts up brown and Black entrepreneurs that are already in tech, since we've been in the game. So just really being able to demystify this notion of tech and is it really for us, to get them engaged and then have kitchen table conversations about what they're about to get engaged in, and then of course staying connected with parents on a daily/weekly as we communicate, you know, how their experience is about to go. And this is all for incoming students that start in the beginning of July this summer. And then for our existing scholars, it just continues in terms of we have scholar portals and ways that we can continue to engage with them. But that's one thing that is really underscoring how important parents are in this. You know, I'm a father of an 8-year-old at home, and you know, I'm a third grade homeroom teacher. I'm a hall monitor, so just making sure Minecraft and the lessons are getting balanced appropriately. So it's all hands on deck. So I think it is bringing an opportunity to bring the entire community together. So just wanted to echo a lot of the things that my fellow colleagues are saying here.
And the other piece that I'm loving is that started when teachers were in the classroom, so that if you were doing computer science, you were setting folks up so that kids were able to debug at home. I think one of the greatest pieces for us to be culturally relevant is not to have the teacher come in like Santa Claus and come to the rescue when a kid is trying to code and they get stuck. If we were really setting up kids for success, they would have all these different secrets that coders are using to get unstuck during a challenge. So what we are really pushing is rubber duck debugging or pair programming or even Flipgrid. There are lots of teachers like Pat Wong that have kids talking to each other about how they got unstuck out of the challenge. So kids feel like an imposter when they don't know the stuff that coders are doing when they're by themselves to get out of a mess. We want to set these kids up to do this by themselves. And this is it. This is a test. The teacher can't come to the rescue now. But we love teachers that are actually modeling, they're reviewing, they're rehearsing what happens when you get stuck and your grown-up can't come to the rescue because the grown-up doesn't know what to do either.
And as much support as like the students and learners need, we know like teachers and educators need support, whether it's families or just like traditional educators. And so for us, we're trying to do a lot of learning around like what type of training they need. We know that like PD funding will be cut and things like that will be faced in the future. And so we're trying to figure out like what types of supports do families and educators need to be able to do all of the best work that you guys are mentioning.
You're on mute, Jamel.
Myself. I said, we got a great, here, I'm gonna mute you guys. We got a great number of different, activities and strategies that are coming through on the chat that I just wanna highlight and recognize, from Flipgrid to the Decipher sessions from Code Society that Christy was a part of. Shout out to Code Society, the bros. You can find out information from them in the expo and check out what that Decipher session, that throwback to 106 in Park, but into the future. You can get an example of what that feels like. And, this thing of like including families and parents, that we're really educating parents as well as, using the performance styles and measures that young people are already into, which is a core tenet of culturally responsive pedagogy. We're just seeing the efficacy of that play out right now. And I think, the point that Christy is making in particular around, why are we stretching to get them to use a platform that they're unfamiliar with, as opposed to putting content in ways that they're already familiar using, where they can actually demonstrate the mastery of that content, have them chat and teach each other. And I think there are a lot of ways that we've seen culture be able to bring people together, from Club Quarantine to the Diddy dance challenges to, TikTok challenges going viral on Instagram. My chest still hurts from like the push-up challenge like 2 weeks ago. And so, finding ways like to bring those types of activities into the classroom and really bring culture into the classroom, I think is, the classroom, your home, is really key at this point. Awesome. So, here we go. Let's go to this next section. Let's talk about equity, because this is a very intense situation. Like, again, I said before, right? We are not here on vacation. We're not here, just taking a break or chilling out. We're here actually during a pandemic that's actually disproportionately affecting Black and brown young people. And before this broke out, there was already a huge gap in terms of access to computational thinking and technology. And we've seen, and have heard reports of young people just being left out of the education process altogether in this period. And that disproportionately affecting Black and brown young people, both from the death rates in places like Detroit and Brooklyn, which is now like the deadliest county in terms of COVID cases in the country, AKA the world right now. And so the impact of that, there is a potential for a pedagogical shift to actually be able to address this, right? And so let's talk about like these tools and how they can be used to actually address this question of equity.
One thing that social media does a really amazing job of, for better or worse, is like adjusting the barrier that there is with getting your voice heard, right? So there's lots of different ways that certain voices are like blocked out of conversations and social media, while there's lots of like had and like things we learned about how to do it responsibly and like, of course, legally, but like ethically, we need to figure out like whether or not social media is actually a way that we can like get some more voice on the table. So I think that kids having a way to like express themselves a little bit more and like bring themselves to work and bring themselves to classrooms is one way to at least start like chipping at that wall that often blocks them out of it. So that's like ways that we're seeing like immediately like coming to the surface.
Right. So just to capitalize on that, we get it that it's the rest of the world is communicating on social media, they're coping, they're using it for creativity, they're even protesting, right? So we talk about that, the Second Poor People's Campaign that will come up June 20th. But if we don't get really specific about how kids can use CS to navigate that world, we've effectively silenced them. So I think it's our duty. Everything that has to do with COVID and brown and Black children and how we get out of this mess is going to end up being the new civil rights movement. And I feel like if kids, it's great, you're a CS explorer, you can use CS for some joy, but there's also a point of showing kids how to use CS as a tool for social justice. So I agree with you, Thea, talking about, look, maybe you're using your Scratch animation to make a PSA, or maybe you're using it to talk to Governor Cuomo and suggesting what you would do for policy. There are so many different things that kids can do, but if we don't suggest to them, hey, look, this is how you make your voice exponentially bigger, or maybe this is how you solve a problem efficiently, we're making a very big mistake. So at CS for All, we like to say, you're an explorer, when you're just getting your feet wet in a guided situation. By the time you get to a CS citizen, that's when you're using CS as a piece for social action. So this is the best time, if any, to start CS as a tool for social action.
Yeah, just to perhaps echo a little bit here. We know, the moment is the impact and the harsh realities that our students are facing, public health crisis, a pending economic crisis, and like when they're going to be able to set down pathways to continue their education, whether they're in high school, college, et cetera. At least that's that's sort of the constituencies that we work with. And also realizing that technology is the equalizer. It's a utility. It's connecting us. It's how we're able to continue our collective work. And technology also has, in terms of a sector, fastest growing, higher pay, better benefits, and better resilience in these types of economic downturns. To marry the computer science and social justice lenses together it's absolutely makes sense. It's also a matter of safety. If you're able to work from home and through the use of your computer science skills and technology skills, for our communities that are frontline essential workers, and as you mentioned, Jamel, COVID cases are soaring in not only in Brooklyn, also here in Queens and Jackson Heights, where I'm so this is an issue of equity. And so I do see social media as being like an incredible bully pulpit to create curiosity and awareness about why computer science is the way to go, how it's an organizing tool. I know for All-Star Code, we really wrap all of our demo day projects that our students take part in as really a social impact, social justice projects. How are you building and using technology for good and for impact in your local communities? So I think all of that makes it underscores the urgency of the moment, and for computer science to be that, to be that lever for change.
Yeah, and Danny mentioned utility, as did Christy. I think that's a key, because currently, access to Wi-Fi and technology is not equally spread across the country. You have many pockets of people, especially in the rural counties or rural areas, that don't have connection to the internet, cannot access many different things. So now's the time to say, how do we provide that to everyone? The same way, I think it's akin to when you cross the street and you see that curb cut so that wheelchairs can access the curb. It's that same kind of equanimity that we need, where as some houses have a refrigerator and a stove, internet and a device also needs to be a part of that. It should be well-rounded and equal access to that.
And just to bring up a point, I see in the chat a really good point about how much COVID talk is too much COVID talk. So, I mean, even with my own boys, we're going between Black Boy Joy and when does social action have to come up? So we talked to a developmental psychologist like Dr. Lloyd Talley before we did challenges about COVID and computer science, right? How much is too much? We get it. Brain needs to de-stress, brain needs to relax so that academic content can begin. But I do think we have to be real and offer kids opportunities. There are kids that talk about racism, sexism, sexual orientation, homophobia for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is just what some families are doing. So you know what? We're giving them another tool, whether it's storytelling through Scratch or through P5, whether it's journaling, whether it's breathing exercises and you're writing an algorithm. There are times that we can talk about it, times that we won't, but we do want to give families options. There are families that are quite racially literate to talk about this, so we don't want to deny them that.
Yeah, that's for the program, for what we run. Embracing difference is such an important part of our curriculum, and it's sort of in addition to code, and it is sort of bringing together these real life forces and real conversations about what's happening in their lives and what they're also aspiring to get focused in on. So I think having those open conversations and resources and supports for parents and instructors is incredibly important.
As a really pivot point in history, where the walls between classroom and the world have actually just dissolved away. And, the urgency of this pandemic and situation has been thrust in front of parents and teachers, students alike, And so it is a sort of thing where I really agree with the comments that have been laid forward in this last round, that we really have to keep it real with students, and that, social media can be used as an advocacy tool to address these very real questions that are actually right in front of people's eyes and laid bare in a way that they haven't been before. In our next round, we got something excited for our audience members. We're inviting you to come on down, all right? And you can come and ask a question right here, so you can request to be on camera. I saw some people earlier. If you click the blue button, you can also throw your questions in the chat, and we're going to spend some time the next 15 minutes or so batting around questions from the chat, as well as if folks want to come up, step up to the mic, jump on screen, ask your question, shout out where you're from, and be a part of this exciting panel. So while people jump in and get theirs, I want to take one of the questions that we saw from here. And sorry, I scrolled up to Zoom dance breaks, and I think that is an excellent idea. Right? But one of these questions here, right, or I'll pull together these comments. I found that many learning communities aren't getting feedback from families to use to guide their learning plans. One question really stemming from that, especially around this question of families, is how do we make these types of tools more accessible for families? What strategies have you seen, or either organizations employ, individuals employ, to kind of bring families into focus?
For some of our educational resources, especially for our families that are English language learners and new, recent, or even long-term immigrants, we're using the IKEA method in terms of instruction, so that everything is visual. Like how do you learn to, you're teaching fourth grade geometry. How do you, as a parent, teach your kid geometry in a form that you've never been taught yourself, in a language that is not your native? We've crafted these images to help teach certain subjects. So using visual arts, using music, using theater, using dance to teach, which is because that's a universal language. Art is universal. That's the center of our that's the essence. So that's been a tactic we've used to try to reach that or meet those.
For our parents and our incoming students, we're I don't think anything out of the ordinary. We're setting up Zooms to be able to just center the work and sort of give instruction and bring parents together to talk more about how just a level of engagement for the program. Oh, we have someone that just joined us.
All right, Francis, take it away. Come on down. Oh, Francis, refresh. Here, I'm gonna move you from the stream, Francis, and come on back up. Yeah, she's coming. She'll be back. All right. For other folks, you can go ahead and jump on in and request. Denny, you can continue on that thread.
One thing I did want to elevate a little bit here is just in the context of the equity discussion is we also work with neurodiverse learners in the program, and I think that's one other piece as I think about sort of the future and designing the educational system that will be, is really designing for making sure that we're also designing for neurodiverse learning and just different learning styles. It's so incredibly important, and it's something that we've seen, and particularly in tech, we see that percentage of not only learners, but also of the workforce continuing to go up and up. So it's something that we're very conscious about when we think about inclusive sort of pedagogy and educational experiences, something just to elevate for this.
All right, and we got our first question. Go for it, Francis.
And so I have a really big question. So hi, Coach Christy, you're the bomb. I love so I have a question. So I think my concern is, how are teachers able to, I love that this is all like teacher-centered and everything, but what I'm noticing is that a lot of district leaders really aren't about this right now. A lot of district leaders really aren't about innovation. A lot of district leaders are really worried about budgets, how to keep the normal going, and not realizing that normal really isn't an option anymore, and normal wasn't working to begin with. So how do we get, I mean, just from your perspectives, how can teachers really get district leaders, superintendents, building leaders to really listen to them and understand that they know what their students need, and how we can start to implement some of the things that we've learned here today across a school-wide or district-wide level?
I mean, I can only hope that teachers are hitting the pavement like a bunch of marketers. Like before I sell a new product, I'm going to survey folks to figure out the demographic. How many pieces of equipment are in the house? Who are you sharing it with? How many hours are you spending during this schoolwork? I would hope that teachers would have all of their surveys on an Excel document, so that when administrator came back and said, how about this, this, and this, teacher needs to say, this is what my families are saying, and this is how I'm responding. It's the proof. I mean, this equal partnership is not only for the child, but I think it's to help the teacher push forward an agenda that's humanizing. Because unfortunately, teachers aren't being listened to even in this time period. And I think it's going to take parents to say, this is exactly what's happening in the house. And I think we need to slow down, because this is teacher as artist, and we aren't being patient enough for the artist and the learner and the learner's family to modify the medium.
Speaking from a very personal perspective, I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I'm from New York City, so I'm very familiar with New York City DOE. I'm hearing that in DOE, they're cutting budgets left and right. Building leaders and district leaders are kind of doing whatever they want. I heard Carranza has a lot going on with other stuff. And here in Kalamazoo, unfortunately, district leaders, they started remote learning 5 weeks too late. After speaking with the president of the educator, coalition, the school board's not listening to them, district is not listening to them, state is not listening to them. So as much as I know teachers are great marketers and they really love to support their kids, sometimes they're so limited. And I feel like even through this virtual learning, their hands are literally tied behind their backs. Like they're not getting access to the software they need. They're not getting access to the students they need. They're not getting it, and they're not being supported.
I mean, I see that across the nation. My mom's a teacher in Chicago. My brother's in LA. So I've been, Jamel's in New York. So I've been talking to educators all around the country. And what I'm thinking and what I'm seeing is a need for us as parents and as educators ourselves to push our school districts and our superintendents to say, push pause right now. We need to actually stop online instruction and take this time between now and the end of the school year in June to plan for the next couple of years, because this isn't going away. It's not like, starting in September, everything's going to be back, students will be back in school. I know we're talking in Washington State, which is depressing, but at least there's a plan for high school to not go back in session at all in the fall in physical form. So all high school students will be learning online from September through June of next year. Elementary through sixth grade, those students will rotate, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, all scattered times, 15 to a class, no transitioning between classes, no PE, no lunch, are all cold. All that's happening. And that's not the plan that needs to happen. We need to reframe the entire education system, right? The pressure on standardized tests, our superintendent, like in April, was like, we'll get back to standardized testing in April of 2021. I'm like, that's not what we should be thinking about right now. That is not what we should be thinking about. So if you have your local council member's ear or anything, I suggest and urge everyone on this call and beyond to say, like, look, here's what our students need, as Christy was saying, and that's what's going to help, quote unquote, help these young people meet their academic needs and outcomes, not all this pressure because it comes down from the governor to the superintendent to the local school districts to put on the teachers. I feel bad for these teachers. My two children have, they're twins, so they're having class at the same time with different teachers who are telling them different information, and then they rotate and they're lost. I mean, the teachers are doing their best, but they're picking at straws. We all need to take a breath. Someone said that earlier, like, not, we don't need to rush. Take a breath, listen to the families, listen to the teachers, listen to the principals, and say, what do we need to work? How can we do this together? Because, there's that old adage, it takes a village. We need our village. Our digital village needs to happen.
Yeah, we got another question coming in. And I want to highlight a question from Christina Lewis as well around how do you balance teacher agency and autonomy versus oversight? Francis, thanks so much. Yeah. So from Christina Lewis about balancing teacher agency and autonomy versus oversight.
That's been the question since teaching started. Hey, I don't think we're going to answer today.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think this thing of oversight is particularly harrowing in a virtual environment where where teachers for more of the time and in some ways are receiving less oversight, where there's not physically like a superintendent like visiting your classroom, but they actually do have access to all your materials, can drop in, turn on your webcam if they need to. You hear all about all of this tracking software. And so we are actually entering into a realm where like this question of oversight and supervision and how that's actually going to constrict the educative process for pedagogues, will start to be a real trend. And I can see that really, in this next period becoming a real tension. I think we're in kind of a moment now that folks have recognized, like a breathing point where it's almost like the Wild West, and educators are figuring out like how they're actually going to do this and build the capacity to be able to do it. And so for right now, I would say that like the animus is actually on a lot of these educators to really explore and actually invest in radical and alternative pedagogical methods right now. Like that's what it's going to take to actually meet our students where they're at. And we should be able to do that right now without the particular oversight or scrutiny. Thea, did you want to jump in? Yeah.
I was cheating a little bit. So I know that you asked us about like the history of this idea, like how historians are calling it like the Great Adaptation. And so, I mentioned two hats. I was wearing one as like a past educator and one currently working in philanthropy. The third one is a little bit of like an education history like nerd, mainly because my dissertation was on that topic and I find it to be fascinating. So if you like look back at education reports or articles about education, you can take a statement that was published in 1912 and realize it could have been published again in 1950 and then again in like 2019. Because unfortunately in education, we tend to have like these reoccurring issues. And so what it sounds like we're converging upon is this idea that right now is like a time where we can really, like, as cheesy as it sounds, like look back and like help us direct where to like move forward to. And I think that will help things like this question about teacher autonomy, which has been a question forever, where we can see what has and hasn't worked in the past and like use that to inform like ways to move forward. And so I know that like everyone's really strapped for time. And I think that it might actually be helpful if that was something that we could find at least a little bit of time to do and like to use that as evidence, as like Christy was mentioning, like always having evidence for the case you're making for how to move forward.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Thea. Oh, yeah. And Diane will throw you in as well. Danielle, got to give a shout out to Danielle. What up? All right.
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to work with Jamel and James, and you really prepared me for this moment in my life. So thank you guys so much. I'm using like everything I learned in Fresh Ed, and I teach third grade now in a charter school in Hunts Point in the Bronx. And the school itself is really good at culturally responsive learning and SEL. I'm really fortunate to work with the people that are there. But now that the kids are home, their home environments are like super stressful, especially struggling with kids who have multiple siblings that are all learning in the same small apartment spaces at the same time. I'm hearing like moms are, beating their children at higher rates. My students are finding ways to like call me in a corner of their apartment and cry to me that their mom keeps hitting them. So just how do we, I mean, SEL has always been important to bridge between school and home, but they were spending a lot of time with us in the school space. But now they're like at home at all times. How do we teach parents and guardians and all that, the SEL, the skills, the strategies? What can we do to help this situation?
Yeah, very good question, Diane. Very good question, Danielle. Sorry.
I mean, at least in the computer science for all realm, we're just trying to remind teachers that we can't do anything until kids are comfortable. So to even talk about abstraction when stuff like this is happening is absolutely crazy. So if it means that your computer science classroom is 40 minutes of how are you really? Not how are you, but how are you really? Is ridiculously important. It's that routine of asking kids how they are. And to be quite frank, there are lots of computer science teachers who are like the 21st century librarian. They are leaving, they're teaching computer science, and then they're actually going to kids' houses, right? Checking their personal hotspot, fixing tech issues, but also looking to see how you doing, mom, and just listening.
Yeah.
Also listening to the kid in person. It seems these teachers need like a national service corps to help them go out and make those in-person visits, because the remote learning isn't gonna cut it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is I was watching a news program yesterday about the pandemic within the pandemic that talked about domestic abuse cases on the rise within this while sheltering home places are in order. And just, I think, Danielle, you're bringing in a really important perspective right now, in particular from the perspective of young people who are in, not ideal circumstances at home, and how are they actually navigating that. And just as a teacher, I definitely want to shout you out, as an expert hip hop pedagogue, and super dope dancer. Got to give it up for Danielle. Queens get the money.
Thanks for the shout out. I did a parade to all my kids' houses. And I mean, I have amazing families. They all came out of their apartments, and we danced and we sang, and we like played a quick game in front of their house. And like in that moment, they're all good. But I know that once they go back into their house and they have their 5-year-olds screaming, and then their 12-year-olds, trying to do their classes, and like they can mean really well, but just pressures get so high that it gets really intense. So my school is trying to find like some sort of professional developments that we can hold for our parents of like meditation strategies to do with their kids, and things like that, because they do it for us and we do it for the kids, but I think the parents are the ones that could really use it too.
Yes, indeed. Thanks so much, Danielle.
Good seeing you guys.
Oh, yeah. All right. I want to thank everybody for making this such an awesome and engaging panel. And we're going to talk about our last point, the future. All right. And this will be our, this is mirroring the lightning round, but on the way out. And look, we know that this situation is going to transform education, work, it's transforming society as we know it. And so if you could leave us, panelists, esteemed panelists, if you could leave us with words to marching orders, where should things be going forward from here?
I'll close by saying that the main idea that I had was just related to being really thoughtful about who's driving the adaptation that we know will be taking place. So it's great to have this really amazing group together that's really diverse, with really knowledgeable, but we want to make sure that the people ultimately making the decision isn't like a group somewhere in a room that looks very similar and has very similar ideas, making the decisions on how we move forward. So I think the marching orders do something that you wouldn't do before. So we know it's a time that's not normal. So I think like a reflection point I've had for myself that if I'm doing the same things I was doing before, that probably means it's not going to take me where I want to go. So as like challenging as it is in all the directions you want to move forward, try to find one way to go in that direction that's outside of what you've done in the past.
I can go next. So we're for context, we're an school service provider. So during the summer is when we engage with our students. I think one of the biggest takeaways or calls to action, at least for us, is certainly to stay connected with the ecosystem. We are all adapting, and we're all adapting in different ways, using different approaches. James had mentioned the example in Washington State, creating this new future of what schools will be, virtual or otherwise. I think just continuing to communicate, share ideas, to come together. I think that's, to me, a really, really important thing, especially as we're moving from this semester into the summer and then, of course, into the fall semester. Questions are big, and I think just staying connected as a community.
We are really trying to take small steps that we can digest and do. We know that family is king, and we are constantly and continually going back to them to create with us. We're trying to
she'll come back. Hop in is fickle. James, why don't you give your final word while she comes back in?
Yeah. Well, our motto at ArtsCorps is to make art anyway. So art has been a refuge for many and a way to escape the daily. So I would say make art anyway, all the time. If we look back to how we recovered from the Great Depression, it was by investing in art, and not just art, but artists, right? Individuals, making, seeing the importance of each individual around you. And then I have a little thing that I like to say, and especially important now, and it's involving the Latin for the word breathe, right? So spire. So I think it's really important for us to, one, inspire, take a deep breath in. What piece of art, what do you breathe in every day that's going to make you feel better? Aspire, what takes your breath away? What is something that's like, oh, I never thought of that before. How do we think differently about things? And then my favorite is conspire. Who do you breathe with, right? How do you breathe with someone? That's going to be more important. And then the last one is perspire, because it's going to take some sweat. It's going to take some work. We got to do it together.
Christy, take it away. Where should we be going forward from here?
Oh, it's for us. I think I was saying family is king. Scaffold that independence. No more teacher giving it all to you. You're going to do this all by yourself, just like a coder would. And we want CS to be a tool for social action or for play, but we're all about being real on engagement and entertaining. We need to approach it like a marketer. And look, I'm competing with Travis Scott. I'm going to make sure that my stuff beats his stuff up.
Oh, well, yes, I'd like to thank all of our panelists. Oh, well, I'm on mute. I'm not on mute. Okay, yes. I'd like to thank all of our panelists. You guys can hear me, for such an awesome panel discussion. Let's give them, let's give them a nice round of applause.
Thank you, Jamel.
Yes, indeed. For such an esteemed and thrilling panel, you guys can double click to maximize that screen to find where to follow these exciting educators, these exciting folks who are involved in fundraising, folks who are involved in after school and out of school programming. We're all out of school right now. And so you can follow me at @JamNoPeanut on Twitter. Whoa. You can follow James Miles at @FreshProfessor, Danny Rojas at @AllStarCode, or at Danny Rojas with a 0 on Twitter. And you can follow Tara Charles to look for Siegel Family Endowment on LinkedIn. All right, and thank you guys so much for being a part of this panel and being a part of this very riveting discussion.